As the Nationals get deeper and deeper into this rebuild, where do you think their farm system should improve the most? They've got two positions of big need.
You are Locked On Nationals, your daily Washington Nationals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thank you all for making Locked On Nationals your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Clary. You can catch me over on Twitter at RyanClary11 and as well as the show page at LO_Nationals. For all your latest Nationals news and notes, just make sure to check us out over on there, including on YouTube. Just search Locked On Nationals and hit that subscriber button. Later on in today's show, the Nationals, they've got some TV news, and that is with Bob Carpenter. If you haven't heard the news net, I'll catch you up later on in today's program. But also, the Nationals, what changes would you make to the coaching staff right now? Because a lot of people going back into this last year expected some changes, and there were some, but not all of them. I think the Nationals could have made two more moves. I'll discuss who that is a little bit later on. But let's start off with discussing some of the position groups of need down in the Nationals farm system. Before we get into that, today's episode is brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50+ infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com and use code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. That's JASEmedical.com. Now we get into it as the Nationals. They are in the thick of this rebuild right now, and there's a lot of different things that are going right. There are some things that aren't really going as to plan, but there are a lot of things going right here for this Nationals rebuild. Number one, you look at it, the outfielding prospects, they all stick out to us right now. You have a plethora of top prospects in this system that really kind of makes you feel satisfied, and you have a feeling that you're going to find guys to place 3 of them out there at some point and to kind of hoist that position of the outfield. You have James Wood, Dylan Cruz, you have Lane Thomas already up in the majors at this point, making an impact, could have been an all-star this last year. You got guys like Christian McCarrow, you got Elijah Green. There's a lot of different Nationals prospects that if you look in the outfield, you're not really all too worried about that. Then it goes to the flip side of it. Third base in particular, you have Brady House and Trey Lipscomb. You have to feel really good about those two positions right then and right there. But kind of mashing these two groups together, this is where it gets a little tricky. Because you see teams like the Dodgers, the Braves, those are the two kind of the best cream of the crop organizations you can say across Major League Baseball right now. What do they do differently, really, than the rest of Major League Baseball? And you can even kind of throw the Rays in this as well. They develop pitching. And they develop pitching like it's an assembly line back in the 1920s. That is how simple it is. When I look at this Nationals farm system, where they lack at this moment in time, the number one lack, really, in my opinion, in this farm system, is the starting pitching. It's not just because you have a handful of prospects here that could be good. You have Jake Irvin last year. He was like your 17th best prospect. He came up. He looked pretty damn good. You have Cade Cavalli recovering from Tommy John surgery. A lot of promise, a lot of hype surrounding him. He could be very good going into this year. You have Mackenzie Gore, who came up and made his first full season in the major leagues. You have Josiah Gray, who just finished his second full season up in the major leagues. You got a lot of young guys already who are already in the starting rotation. But beyond that, you don't really have that many guys. You don't. You have Cade Cavalli. Other than that, Jackson Rutledge, he's fine, but at this moment in time, are you really going to be banking on him? You have Cole Henry, who's coming off TOS, thoracic outlet syndrome. We all know how that is with Steven Strasburg. There's a lot of different things and a lot of different cases in which you could say the Nationals do have a little bit of depth. But there's also kind of that luck in there that the Nationals just simply have not been able to find as of recent. They kind of got it with Jake Irvin. But other than that, you've had a lot of first-round picks and even later-round picks who have developed and done well down in the minors who have not really made that jump up into the major leagues. The Nationals going into this season, going into this draft, going into just this rebuild and trying to revamp this farm system as they continue to try to do, you're going to have to figure out a way to really stockpile some pitching, not just starting pitching as well, just pitching in general. You have Yarlene Susana, another big-time prospect that you got in that Juan Soto deal, but ultimately, he hasn't been really what he was thought out to be. He really struggled down in Fredericksburg. He really struggled to find the zone, but he still has a lot of talent. It's just what can the Nationals do with that talent? And I think that's always kind of been the story with this Nationals team when it comes to developing pitching. You've seen all the years that the Nationals have taken first-round talent of starting pitchers. Hasn't all worked out too well. Hasn't really worked out well since Steven Strasburg. Cade Cavalli and Lucas Giolito, those are other names that you would think could work out, but even then, it hasn't been all that pretty. The Nationals going into this rebuild, you're going to have to improve starting pitching. I think with the addition of Brad Ciolek from the Baltimore Orioles and Danny Haas from the Arizona Diamondbacks, I think guys like that, from Ciolek, who comes from an analytical background, who kind of ran the draft for the Orioles, you have to think right off the bat that starting pitching is going to be a big help in this organization. Maybe you land a few guys in the middle rounds that you may not have in prior drafts. That's what I'm kind of looking at going into this season, going into this draft in particular as well, and going into just the minor league baseball season. You need guys to really just kind of hone in and be better pitchers. Now, it's not up to them. It's up to the organization and utilizing everything that is given to them. Analytics, numbers, spreadsheets, whatever it may be, the Nationals, they're going to need to improve starting pitching. Another one, the second one of need, in my opinion, is really middle infielders. Looking across this system right now, the Nationals, you would like to think C.J. Abrams is going to be your shortstop of the future. I'm going to bet my money on that right now. You don't necessarily need shortstops. But then you look at second base and middle infield as well for a shortstop. It's not that pretty. Looking beyond C.J. Abrams and Luis Garcia, who are up in the big leagues, what do the Nationals have? You could throw in Trey Lipscomb in there, even though he's really more of a natural third baseman. This is someone who won a Gold Glove over at the hot corner. Could play second base, could play shortstop, but ultimately, he's not going to be probably either of those. If anything, he might be a second baseman up in the big leagues. But at this moment, I'm not really counting him as a second baseman. Other than that, you have shortstop Kevin Midday, who's a very good infielder, very good defensive shortstop. That's who you got back in the Jeimer Candelario trade, but ultimately, he's all not that big of a difference maker. Then beyond that, you have Nasim Nunez, who was a high pick in the Rule 5 draft from this last year. He's going to be on the Major League roster. Good fielder. He can steal a lot of bases, but ultimately, probably not going to be a huge, major impact kind of player up in the big leagues. Then you have Darren Baker and Armando Cruz. And Darren Baker, he's probably going to be moving out to the outfield. That's where the Nationals really need to improve in my mind. And again, it's not some huge pressing need up in the major leagues, but still, you need a second baseman to fill out. You can't tell me today that you are sold on Luis Garcia taking this job. You can't tell me that Nasim Nunez, that you are sold on him taking this job going forward. And even at this moment, you can't even tell me that you're going to be sold on Trey Lipscomb taking the second base job going forward. Looking at the middle infield, this is a pretty big need in this national system. You already got the outfielders figured out. You've got third base figured out. You even have some catchers in there that provide some interesting depth in this organization. First base, that is an obvious position of need, but we'll get to that at some point later on in the show. But right now, looking at middle infielders, it's just way too valuable. It's way too valuable in your system to draft and develop and assign international prospects to come in and play solid shortstop, because there's a lot of talent out there that teams just simply whiff on, whether it be international talent, whether it be drafting talent. The Nationals, they can improve this right here and right now. You can kind of expedite these guys. And if you're a shortstop, this is kind of the way I think about it. If you're a shortstop, you can probably play basically any position on the diamond. You can play in the outfield. You can play at third base. You can play second base. The reason why I say that, shortstop is probably the most athletic position of all defenders out there. You got a lot of space to cover. You're kind of the captain of the infield there. And ultimately, you're typically the best athlete on the field outside of center field. Going with shortstop, drafting shortstop in particular, is something that I would always sign up for. And if you see a lot of these high school prospects that you take, a lot of these guys are shortstop, and you may see them go out to the outfield and play center field, play right field, like you've seen Bryce Harper back in the day, who was a catcher at one point, moved into the outfield. There's a lot of different possibilities here. But ultimately, the Nationals improve that middle infield and see what you can get out of them. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to stick at second base or shortstop. Move them around. Try to find different positions. You don't have to worry about how the dominoes fall. You just have to get the dominoes to fall. And the Nationals, getting the middle infield help, kind of adding shortstop, adding that depth down in your farm system is going to make a big key difference for this team and for this organization moving forward. And hopefully they can just figure that problem out, because it has been a little bit of an issue in this Nationals farm system. Thank you all for making Locked On Nats your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can check us out over on Twitter at LO_Nationals, and as well as the show YouTube page. Just search Locked On Nationals there, and that is where you'll get your latest Nationals news, and of course in video form as well. We'll discuss some coaching staff changes as well, coaching staff changes that we want to see. Let's kind of take that back real quick. They haven't made these changes yet. This is what I want to see going forward, and I think a lot of Nationals fans may probably agree. We'll discuss that after I tell you guys about our friends over at Jase Medical. And guys, I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of life, but can we just talk for a minute about preparing for real life? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. This is scary, everybody. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than if my mom or one of my kids got sick while a supply chain issue kept them from the life-saving medication that they needed. Thankfully, we'll be okay because of Jase Medical. The Jase case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, among others. This stuff could happen to any of us. So when you do that, visit jasemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared today. So go to jasemedical.com and use the offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. Again, go to jasemedical.com and use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. Now we get back into it as the Nationals are entering this rebuild. And of course, as we are entering this rebuild, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Again, that is Locked On Sports Today. And as we get into kind of this Nationals coaching staff discussion, there's a lot of different things out there that I think people wanted to see change over this last year. And ultimately, the Nationals, they kind of wiped out a lot of their different guys. You got rid of Eric Young Jr., Gary DiSarcina, a lot of different guys you've moved around the organization. And now this is what the National staff looks like going into 2024. You have manager Davey Martinez, and then you have Miguel Cairo, the new bench coach for the Nationals. Then you have hitting coach Darnell Coles, pitching coach Jim Hickey. Gerardo Parra has moved over from assistant to the GM to the first base coach. Ricky Gutierrez over at third base. Henry Blanco still the catching and strategy coach. Ricky Bones, the bullpen coach, and Chris Johnson, your assistant hitting coach. You notice 2 names in there, Jim Hickey and Darnell Coles. Let's start out with the first one here. This one is going to be popular amongst Nationals fans. But if it was up to me today and I could hit one button to make one coaching staff change, just one, it would be Jim Hickey moving on from the Washington Nationals. I'm not here to say that Jim Hickey has done a bad job. In fact, with what he has been given, considering a lot of different circumstances with the Nationals, number one, you're not spending all that much money. And number two, you have someone that Patrick Corbin in there. He does not want Patrick Corbin in that rotation. I can tell you that right now. It's not his decision to have him out there pitching every 5 days. You just have to do it when you're paying the guy $30+ million. You're not going to be putting them in the back of the bullpen. And the way that this team is spending, you're not going to be eating up his contract and telling him to go sign somewhere else. That ain't happened. So, with that said, Jim Hickey, I got to admit, has been dealt kind of unfair cards, to say the least. There's a lot of different things out of his control with Trevor Williams this last year. Years before that, you've had a lot of injuries. Cade Cavalli this last year, Tommy John surgery, all the different things in the world. Here's one thing, though. The thing that I can't align with Jim Hickey is kind of quotes that he has said in the past when asked about analytics. If you look across baseball right now, and especially when it comes to pitching, analytics mean a lot. Seeing all of this information, if you don't want to say analytics, just call it information because that is what it is. Using this information and benefiting it in the best way possible. That is what has taken over baseball. For some say better, some say worse. But ultimately, it's not changing the game. And if it is changing the game, that's just, I think, the way that you perceive it. The way that I perceive it, I look at this as information. I don't think Jim Hickey is really aligned with that kind of thinking at this moment. Some people may say good, but also like me, give me the best from both worlds here. You don't have to live and breathe by analytics. You can use both, just kind of the old school philosophy, which is what Jim Hickey is. And you could also kind of pinch and grab from that bag of analytics, aka information. Jim Hickey hasn't done that. Jim Hickey, in fact, does not do that. That is not what he has done over the course of his few years here in Washington, D.C. Going in with Jim Hickey, I don't think it's a detriment. But I want someone who's going to be part of this team in the future. As of right now, if you were to ask me a year from now, is Jim Hickey going to be on this coaching staff in 2025? I'm not betting on it. Unless something crazy happens in the Nationals with Josiah Gray, Mackenzie Gore, they really take off. Cade Cavalli comes in. He really shows that he's got a lot of promise. Jake Irvin comes in. He shows that he's got a lot of promise. If all those things happen, sure, you could probably talk me into it. But I'm not really seeing that at this moment. I don't think the Nationals, I don't think this is what the young staff wants. I don't think this is what maybe the Nationals organization wants for the long term. I just don't really see Jim Hickey really lasting on this staff going forward. It doesn't really make sense. It feels lame duckish already with me. It feels as if we know what's going to happen is that he's going to get blown out after this year. And then all of a sudden, we'll just be like, we kind of knew this was coming years ago. This was something that fans wanted after 2022. This was something that fans desperately wanted after the 2023 season. Now, there was some improvements this year. I can't just hammer the guy because ultimately he didn't do this god-awful job. It wasn't. But he also didn't do an amazing job. I don't look at this Nationals pitching staff and say, Jim Hickey did the most that he possibly could with it. Josiah Gray, he took some steps up. Mackenzie Gore flashed in a lot of different starts this year. Jake Irvin looked good. But also, other than that, not really that much. Trevor Williams took a massive step back. Patrick Corbin was Patrick Corbin. All the other young guys who came up and tried to pitch wasn't all that pretty. So going in it with Jim Hickey, I would make that change like today. Then also on the flip side of it, the hitting coach, Darnell Coles. Again, are you going to look at this offense and say, the reason why we didn't produce is because of Darnell Coles? Not necessarily. But I think the Nationals, again, for the same argument as Jim Hickey, we know Darnell Coles is not going to last past this 2024 season. It's not going to happen. The Nationals, they're going to have to make some changes if we expect them to be probably as bad as they will this year. They're not going to be awful, but still you're probably going to be around 75, maybe 80 wins if you're lucky. Is it going to be because of the offense? The Nationals kind of carry themselves to it? No. But also, you haven't really seen that many guys take steps up. And Darnell Coles, is it just on him? No. C.J. Abrams took a step up this year. Darnell Coles was certainly credited for that. Other than that, not that much. Joey Meneses kind of took a step back this year after having a very good second half of 2022. Riley Adams kind of took a step up this year, but even then, short time. Keibert Ruiz, He took a step up this year, but not all by that much. So going up with it, the Nationals, they've got some changes to make. It's just ultimately what can they do with it and how can they do it and how can they make this the most valuable way in return possible? Because the Nationals going into this year, you feel like you have two coaches who are playing in prominent roles right now that are kind of lame duck. And when you have a lame duck coach, you can tell me that it's a duck. You can tell me it quacks like a duck. It walks like a duck. But don't tell me it's a duck. Because I know what a duck is. I feel like I'm looking at him. Thank you all for making Locked On Nats your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, check us out over on YouTube. Just search Locked On Nationals there to get the video version of this podcast. So before we get into talking about some Nationals TV news when it comes to Bob Carpenter, the Nationals play-by-play guy, let me tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. And guys, the NFL regular season is wrapping up, and now it's time for the playoffs, and it's time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. And when you do that, go to FanDuel, guys, because the app is always so easy to use. There are so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. You can even find bets in their new Explore tab and make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, just like I do. And it's the best way to find popular parlays with the Parlay Hub. And of course, there's much, much more in-game betting. Whatever you want, FanDuel has got it covered for you. So when you do that, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. Again, FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. And the Nationals, they've got some broadcasting news as Bob Carpenter, Washington Nationals play-by-play guy for basically forever now. If you're my age, you grew up with Bob Carpenter from when you were a kid, a very tiny kid, until now to your adult life. It's a lot to think about. Bob Carpenter, from what it kind of reading the tea leaves, probably has his last 2 years here in Washington, D.C. coming up. Bob Carpenter over the weekend put out a tweet saying that he has signed with Masson in the Nationals for another 2 more years, in which he will be doing most of the road games and around half of the home games for 2024 and as well as 2025. Bob Carpenter, start with this first. Baseball legend here in Washington, D.C. The sound of the Washington Nationals, the see you later call. All those things will ring true in Nationals fans' heads for the rest of our lives. That is first things first here. Bob Carpenter, legend. That is where the conversation starts here in Washington, D.C. But also on the other hand, this kind of sucks. This sucks in a sense. Having the last 2 years of someone that you could say is a soundtrack of baseball here in Washington, D.C., alongside Charlie Slows and Dave Jagler from 106.7 The Fan, there are a lot of different emotions going through my head. Number one, kind of this announcement part of it, where you're sending out a tweet saying, got about 2 years left. And now he didn't say that he's done after 2 years, but he did acknowledge that he's going to be winding down his career over these next 2 years, and he'll only be doing around half of the home games over the next 2 seasons. He'll be doing most of the road games, which will be pretty cool. He'll get to travel around baseball world just the last few times here, but still, this kind of stinks. It kind of sucks to see the old kind of go away here. And Bob Carpenter is a legend here in Washington, D.C. I think a lot of Nationals fans over the years have kind of gotten a little tired of the missing games with Dan Kolko and everything. But ultimately, Bob Carpenter, he is the guy. That is the guy when you talk about Nationals baseball. That is the voice that you will hear when you look back at the 2019 season. You'll look back and you will hear the sound of see you later. All those different things. Bob Carpenter is a legend here in Washington, D.C. So I want to acknowledge that in some way, shape, or form going forward. And now you have 2 more years of Bob Carpenter. And I'm not going to lie, it's going to hit me like tons of bricks, to say the least. Thank you all for making Locked On Nats your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. I'll catch you guys tomorrow, which is on the flip side. and we'll talk some more Nats baseball and see what the Nats do for the rest of the offseason. Catch you.